What do you think are the odds that there is life elsewhere in the universe?
They must be high, and I'll tell you why. People say, well, have you found life yet? No. Well, that's like going to the ocean. This has been said before, taking a cup of water, scooping up and saying, there are no whales in the ocean, Here's my data, You need a slightly bigger sample. And so if you look at, for example, what we call the radio bubble, this is the sphere around Earth, centered on Earth, which is the farthest our radio signals have reached in the galaxy. And they're about 70 light years away. We've been transmitting radio signals inadvertently leaking into space for about 70 years. 70 light year radius sphere. Well, how big is the galaxy? We'll shrink that sphere down to maybe the size of a BB, and then the galaxy on that scale would be the size of this stage. That's how far our radio signals have traveled. And those aren't even the ones we sent on purpose. The ones we sent on purpose have traveled much less. So no, we haven't actually reached as far into the galaxy as we'd like before we would say definitively that there's no one intelligent living today. But here's some very simple facts. I can review them in 90 seconds. You look at the formation of the Earth and the earliest sign of fossil life. Subtract a few 100 million years at the beginning of Earth, when Earth was a shooting gallery. Earth was still accreting the birth materials of the solar system. It's hostile to complex chemistry over that time. Not fair to start the clock then. Wait a couple 100 million years. Now start the clock and wait around and see when you have the first signs of single-celled life. At most, 400 million years. At most. Earth has been around for 4.5 billion. So Earth, without any help from us, with basic ingredients found throughout the universe, managed to create life, simple though it was. So, and Earth, one of, 8 planets, get over it. One of, sorry. Earth, an ordinary star, to suggest, and what are the ingredients of life? The number 1 atom in your body is hydrogen. Number 2 atom is oxygen, together making mostly water that's in you. Next is carbon in this order. Next is nitrogen. Next is other stuff. My favorite element, other, yeah. You look at the universe, the number 1 element in the universe is hydrogen. Next is helium, chemically inert, couldn't do anything with it anyway. Next is carbon. I think I left out oxygen there. Next is oxygen. Next is nitrogen. 1 for 1. We're not even made of odd things. The most common things in the universe are found here on Earth, and we're made of them. And carbon, one of the most chemically fertile element on the periodic table. It's not a surprise. We're carbon-based. Life is just the extreme expression of complex chemistry. So that's what biology is. So all these people who want to imagine, because they remembered their chemistry class, that silicon sits right below carbon on the periodic table. So it bonds similarly to carbon. So they want to imagine silicon-based life. I'm saying, okay, fine, but you don't have to. There's 5 times as much carbon in the universe as silicon. There's no need to even have to go there. We got enough to imagine just simply with the carbon atom at the center of these huge biological molecules. Point is, it happened relatively quickly with the most common ingredients in the universe. To now say life on Earth is unique in the universe would be inexcusably egocentric.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Oh.
And I would go further and say that if ever you meet somebody who wishes to claim that he believes or she believes that life is unique in the universe, then it would follow from that belief that the origin of life on this planet would have to be a quite stupefyingly rare and improbable event. And that would have the rather odd consequence that when chemists try to work out theories, models of the origin of life, what they should be looking for is a stupendously improbable theory, an implausible theory. If there was a plausible theory of the origin of life,
it wouldn't be it.
That's right, because then life would have to be
everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Now, maybe it is everywhere. My hunch is that there's lots and lots of life in the universe, but it's probably, because the universe is so vast, the islands of life that there are so spaced out that it's unlikely that any one of them will ever meet any other, which is rather sad.
It's sad. However, let me make you happy a little bit more from that. We've learned now that we can model the formation of the solar system. And this period of time where Earth was being bombarded heavily, that's called the period of heavy bombardment in the early universe. We call it like we see it in astrophysics. Let the record show. I don't know if I've ever in my life ever understood the title of a biology research paper. I just want to say that. Just the words, I'm not feeling them, you know. They're too big, too many syllables. I'm off topic here. So back to the period of heavy bombardment, and with computer simulations you can model what happens when an impact hits a planetary surface. And it's not much different from if you sprinkle Cheerios on a bed, which you would never do on purpose, but your kids would do this. And then you smack the surface of the bed, there's a sort of a recoiling effect and Cheerios pop upwards. It turns out Mars may have been wet, we know at some point it had water, and fertile for life before Earth. And at this period of heavy bombardment, if it had started life, surely it would have been simple life. There's no reason to think otherwise. We've learned that bacteria can be quite hardy, as you surely know. So we imagine a bacterial stowaway in the nooks and crannies of one of these rocks that are cast back into space. In fact, if you do the calculation, there's hundreds of tons of Mars rocks that should have fallen to Earth by now over the history of the solar system. Maybe one of those rocks carried life from Mars to Earth, seeding life on Earth. My great disappointment would be going to Mars and finding Mars life based on DNA.
Yeah.
Then it would not have been a separate experiment in life. We would just all simply have to get over the fact that we are Martian descendants.
What we need is a second sample of life. We have only one at present. And
why have you only given us one?
It would be a disappointment, as you say, if we found life on Mars based on DNA. Well, at least if we found life on Mars based on the same DNA code.
Sure.
You just about imagine DNA evolving twice, but you couldn't imagine the same four-letter code evolving twice. So, but I wanted to make a point that your calculation of it took only about 400 million years at the most for the first life to arise. For the first life capable of broadcasting radio waves capable of being detected elsewhere in the universe, it took approximately just under 4 billion years.
Yeah.
About 4 billion years.
4 billion.
Which is about half the life that we can expect the solar system to exist.
Mm-hmm.
The next.
And there's an implicit assumption that you're making inadvertently, possibly, that intelligence is an inevitable consequence of the evolutionary record. And I'm skeptical of that, because if that were the case, what we call our intelligence would have happened multiple times in the fossil record, and it hasn't. Whereas other things have shown up plenty of times, like the sense of sight and locomotion. There's some rather inventive ways things can get around the world. My favorite is the snake, of course. No arms, no legs, yet it gets around just fine. I'm imagining an alien visiting Earth, stumbling on a snake, the only creature it sees, right? And then it goes back and tells its home people, "You're not going to believe what I saw. There's a creature on that planet. No arms, no legs. It can still get around. It detects its prey with infrared rays and can eat things 5 times bigger than its head." And they'll think the guy was on drugs.
Yeah.
It's an ordinary snake sitting here on our Earth.
Yeah.
Just while I'm on the subject, big disappointment I have are Hollywood aliens. And I don't know who to blame for this, Hollywood or biologists that advise them. Hollywood aliens are way too anthropomorphic for me. Even E.T., He had a head, shoulders, arms. Okay, he had 3 fingers instead of 5. There's still fingers at the end of a hand. He had legs, he had feet. That's human. And look at the diversity of life on Earth to draw from if you want to think about the ways of being alive. I'm just so disappointed. And not even that I know that I can help them, but one of my favorite aliens ever was the Blob. Did you see that movie?
No, I don't see as many movies as you.
Blob is classic. And I just thought that was an attempt to try to create some kind of way of being alive.
That's a very laudable attempt. It is interesting to look around the animal kingdom and count up the number of times that some things have evolved. I mean, eyes several dozen times, ears quite a large number of times. Echolocation, that's finding your way around by sonar, only 4 times. So that's
a bat and who else?
A bat, whales, and 2 different groups of birds, cave-dwelling birds, and a few rudimentary examples in some shrews and sea lions, but really 4 different times. Intelligence and language of the humankind only once, as you pointed out.
So it can't be that important for survival.
Well,
if natural selection is at work, it should have shown up many more times.
You think so? But I mean, it's a genuinely interesting point that I think biologists haven't thought about enough, is to go around the animal kingdom counting up the number of separate arisings of something, because that does tell you something about what you might expect elsewhere in the universe. You'd expect eyes. You might expect echolocation. Hypodermic syringes, stingers. About a couple of dozen... I'm talking about independent evolutions now. So that's an interesting question. And another relevant point is you look around the world at different island continents and say, how many times, how similar are they? You look at Australia, the Australian mammals, for example, and there are very, very powerful similarities between Australian mammals, which evolved entirely independently of mammals in South America, independently again of mammals in Asia and Africa. And so, again, that gives you a kind of a clue for how predictable evolution is. Other worlds are going to be very different, but we perhaps shouldn't write off the possibility that the Hollywood aliens are they might not be that unimaginative. I mean, my colleague Simon Conway Morris has even suggested that there is very likely that there will be, if not humans, at least bipedal, big-brained, language-toting, hand-toting, forward-looking eyes for stereoscopy, pretty much humans. He thinks it's highly likely. He's got a religious agenda, I'm sorry to say, for that. But I, like him, I appreciate the power of natural selection. I think that...
By the way, I think if he were... if he were a creature other than a primate, he might be giving a different list of things.
I think that's
matter.
right. Yeah, I think that's probably right.
The horse doesn't have 2 eyes facing forward, but the horse damn near can see directly behind it. And so the horse would be valuing that fact.
Oh, I'm not denigrating horses at all. I mean, there are lots.
I'm just saying that's your first sign that there's bias is you start listing the human features that you would want in an alien.
I don't want to say that I'm not picking on humans because they're superior, but because they're us. I mean, we have stereoscopic vision, we have 3-dimensional vision, horses don't. They have a different kind of vision, insects have a different kind of vision. Bats have echo. I mean, it's not vision, but it's using sound to produce what I would guess inside the bat's brain is probably perceived rather the same way we perceive visually, because why wouldn't you use the tools of the brain, of the mammalian brain,
to create an image,
to create a model of the world? I've even speculated...
Movies here, sorry.
My speculation is that bats hear in colour. Because why wouldn't you use colour? Colour is just hue, perceived hue, is nothing more than a label that the brain uses.
Precisely. That's all it is. Yeah. Color, you attach it to some sequence of changed phenomena.
And so bats would most usefully use colour as a sign. For example, the difference between a furry moth and a leathery locust might be perceived as red versus blue. Mm-hmm. And that would be a very useful way for natural selection to have tied the labels of hue onto something that would seem very strange to us. But we're coming to the end of our time.
Didn't we just begin?